Have you ever wondered what the exact price of disrespect is? I found out on a crisp Saturday afternoon in October. I learned that it costs exactly $127,000 a custom-tailored suit and a father's heart. Before that day, I thought I was the father of the bride. By the time the sun set, I learned I was merely the financier of a stranger's party, a ghost with a checkbook. The story of how I vanished from my own daughter's life doesn't begin with a fight or a final argument. It begins with a photograph, a clipboard, and a quiet, soul-crushing revelation at the gates of a paradise I had paid for, but was not welcome to enter. The engine of my old Ford F-150 rumbled softly as I pulled into the valet line, a stark contrast to the silent, gleaming German luxury cars that surrounded it. The truck, with its faded paint and a few honorable dents from years of honest work, was a part of me. It had hauled lumber for the deck I built for my late wife. It had moved my daughter Brianna into her first college dorm, and today it had brought me to her wedding. I felt a surge of pride looking at the magnificent venue, the Greystone Manor, nestled in the rolling hills just outside Atlanta. Its stone facade and perfectly manicured lawns screamed of old money and elegance. I had winced when I signed the check for it, but seeing the joy on Brianna's face made every dollar feel like an investment in her happiness. I stepped out, smoothing the front of my new suit. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I had ever owned, a gift to myself for this very occasion. I felt a nervous excitement, the kind any father feels before he walks his only child down the aisle. As I approached the grand entrance, a young security guard stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform immaculate. His name tag read Deshawn. "Good afternoon, sir." "Invitation," he asked, his voice polite but firm. I chuckled. "I'm the father of the bride's son, Charles. I think my face is the invitation." Deshawn's professional smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. He avoided my eyes, looking down at a clipboard he held in his hands. "I still need to see your name on the guest list, sir." "Orders." "Of course, no problem," I said, still feeling charitable. "Must be under Charles." "Charles Baker." He scanned the list, his finger moving slowly down the page. He flipped a page, then another. The silence stretched. The line of guests behind me was growing, their curious glances feeling like tiny pinpricks on my skin. Deshawn cleared his throat, a look of genuine discomfort on his young face. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't see that name here." "That can't be right," I said, my good humor starting to fade. "Brianna Baker's wedding. My daughter. Maybe check under Baker." He shook his head, still refusing to meet my gaze. "Sir, we were given a specific list." He hesitated, then turned the clipboard around. "We were given this." And that's when I saw it. It wasn't a list of names. It was a single sheet of paper. At the top was a photograph of me. It was my favorite picture taken 5 years ago at Brianna's college graduation. I was beaming, my arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders, so proud I felt my heart would burst. Beneath that image, that cherished memory frozen in time, were 5 words printed in bold, unforgiving capital letters. "Do not admit under any circumstances." I stared at the words, but my mind was fixated on the photograph. I remembered the warmth of that day, the way Brianna had hugged me and whispered, "I couldn't have done it without you, Daddy." I remembered the weight of her in my arms, a feeling that had grounded me since the day she was born. Now that same face, that same memory was being used as a wanted poster to keep me out of the most important day of her life. The world around me seemed to go silent. The cheerful music from inside, the laughter of the guests, the rustling of the autumn leaves, it all faded into a dull roar in my ears. A coldness started in my chest and spread through my entire body, a chilling, profound understanding that this was no mistake. This was a message. This was an execution. I walked back to my truck, each step feeling heavy, disconnected from my body. The laughter and music from the manor seemed to mock me, a celebration I was funding but forbidden to attend. I opened the heavy door of the F-150 and slid into the driver's seat. The familiar scent of worn leather and old coffee filled my lungs, a scent of home, of work, of a life I had built with my own 2 hands. Inside the cab, the world went silent. The thick glass muted the party, reducing it to a distant, meaningless hum. In that silence, the image of my smiling face on that blacklist burned behind my eyes. It wasn't just a denial of entry, it was an erasure of my existence. My hand felt like a lead weight as I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over Brianna's name, her smiling profile picture looking back at me. A part of me didn't want to make the call. A part of me wanted to drive away to leave this nightmare behind and pretend it never happened. But I had to know. I had to hear it from her. I pressed the call button. It rang twice before she answered. The sound that greeted me was not my daughter's voice, but a wave of noise. The upbeat tempo of a dance song, the clinking of glasses, a burst of collective laughter. The party was in full swing. My party. "Dad," she finally said, her voice distant, slightly annoyed, as if I were a telemarketer interrupting her dinner. "Brianna," I said, keeping my own voice steady through sheer force of will. "I'm outside the gates. There seems to be a mix-up with the security team." I gave her an out, a chance to feign shock and fix this supposed error. There was a pause. I could hear her move, the background noise softening as if she had turned her back to the crowd. When she spoke again, her voice was different. It was stripped of all warmth, flat and rehearsed. "Dad, there's no mistake." The words hit me harder than any physical blow. "No mistake," I repeated, my voice cracking slightly. "Brianna, they have my picture. On a clipboard. It says I'm not allowed in. What in God's name is going on?" Another pause, this one filled with a sigh of impatience. "Look, Cynthia and we talked about it. We decided it would be better this way. Less drama, you know. Drama. That was the word she chose. The years I spent working 2 jobs after her mother passed away. The holidays I mortgaged to pay for her tuition. The countless hours I spent worrying, providing, loving. All of it was reduced to a single dismissive word. Drama. A cold rage, unlike anything I had ever felt, began to rise from the pit of my stomach. "Drama," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I paid for this drama, Brianna. The $5,000 flowers the band you just had to have, the very ground this party is happening on. That was all my drama." "Please don't do this," she snapped, her voice turning sharp. "Don't you dare make this about money. This is my day. It's supposed to be perfect." Her perfect day. A day made perfect by my complete and utter absence. That was all I needed to hear. I didn't yell, I didn't curse, I simply said, "I understand." And I ended the call. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat as if it were on fire. For a long moment I just sat there, staring through the windshield at nothing. The hurt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. But then something shifted. The pain began to cool, to harden, crystallizing into something else. It was resolve. Cold, clear, and absolute. The trembling in my hands stopped. My jaw set. The fog of disbelief cleared, and I saw the path forward with perfect clarity. I put the key in the ignition. The old truck roared to life, a familiar and comforting sound. But I didn't put it in drive to go home. Instead, I pulled out of the valet line and drove slowly down the road, turning into a small, tree-lined alcove about 100 yards from the entrance. I switched off the engine. From here, I had a perfect view of the gate. They wanted me gone, but I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. The silence in my truck was a heavy blanket. Outside, the muffled sounds of the wedding continued a party for a life I was no longer a part of. But the shock, the deep, gut-wrenching pain was already beginning to recede. Like a fire that had burned through all the available fuel, the white-hot grief was leaving behind something harder and colder in its place. It was the icy calm of a man who had nothing left to lose. My hand was steady now as I picked up my phone again. I didn't look at Brianna's picture. I scrolled past it, my thumb moving with purpose through my contacts list until it found the name I was looking for, Brenda, accountant. Brenda had been with me for over 30 years. She handled the books for my construction business from the day I founded it to the day I retired. She knew every dollar I had ever earned, and more importantly, every dollar I had ever spent. She was more than just my accountant. She was my friend, my confidant, the keeper of my financial history. I pressed the call button. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Charles, don't tell me you're calling me on your daughter's big day. You should be drinking champagne and practicing your father of the bride speech, not calling your boring old accountant." Her cheerful tone was like a key turning in a lock I didn't know was there, and for a second the facade of my composure almost cracked. I took a deep breath. "Brenda," I said, my voice low and even. "It's me. Listen carefully. I need you to activate Winter Protocol, effective immediately. The line went quiet. I could hear the faint hum of her office computer in the background. Winter Protocol, she finally asked, her voice losing its warmth, replaced by a note of confusion and concern. Charles, what are you talking about? I thought that was just a joke, a silly name you came up with for a worst-case scenario that would never happen. I wish it were a joke, Brenda, I said, staring out at the stone gates of the manor, but I've never been more serious in my life. My God. Charles, what happened? Are you okay? Is Brianna okay? Brianna is fine, I said. She's inside having the time of her life. I, on the other hand, have been deemed unworthy of attending. I've been blacklisted from my own daughter's wedding. I said the words without emotion, a simple statement of fact. The sharp intake of Brenda's breath was audible. They did what, Charles? That's monstrous. It is what it is, I replied. But actions have consequences. Are you at your computer? Yes, I'm here, she said, her voice now all business. What do you need me to do? Every outstanding payment related to this wedding, I want you to cancel them all right now, every single one. All of them, Charles. Are you sure? The final deposits, the balances, the contracts? I am sure, I said, a wave of liberating certainty washing over me. Let's start with the venue, the Greystone Manor. There's a final payment of $20,000 scheduled for transfer on Monday morning. I want you to stop it. Call their accounts department and inform them that due to unforeseen circumstances, the source of funding is no longer available. Okay, Brenda said, and I could hear the clicking of her keyboard. $20,000 to Greystone Manor. Cancelled. Next, I continued, the caterers. Artisan Events, they're owed a final balance of $15,000. That was for the lobster tails Kevin insisted on, and the champagne fountain Cynthia said was non-negotiable. Cancel it. $15,000 to Artisan Events, she confirmed. Done. The band. The Midnight Groovers. $8,000. Brianna cried when I told her I had booked them. Tears of joy. Tell them the gig is off. My voice remained a monotone, betraying none of the memory's sting. Click, click, click. 8,000. Cancelled. Charles, this is going to be a disaster. It's already a disaster, Brenda, I said. I'm just deciding who gets to clean up the mess. What about the florist, Blooms of Eden? $5,000 for orchids flown in from Hawaii because, and I quote my ex-wife, peonies are for common people. Make sure they don't see a dime of it. This is financial scorched earth, Charles, she whispered, but the sound of her typing continued unabated. 5,000. Stopped. What else? Everything, I said. The photographer, the wedding cake designer, the vintage car rental. Go through the event file, find every invoice, every contract, pull the plug on all of them, inform them all that the client has had a fundamental change of heart regarding the financing of the event. For a full minute, the only sound was the frantic clicking of Brenda's keyboard as she worked. She was a master of her craft. Okay, she finally said, her voice strained. It's done. I've put a stop payment order on every check and canceled every scheduled bank transfer. Charles. Once you do this, there's no going back. Going back where, Brenda? I asked, looking at the laughing, celebrating figures moving behind the distant windows of the manor. They closed that door on me, not the other way around. I'm just locking it from my side. I took one last look at the party I had paid for, then put the truck in gear. The engine rumbled a low growl of defiance. The real drama, I thought, was just about to begin. I didn't have to wait long. I had driven home the 20-minute journey feeling like a lifetime. I walked into my empty house, the silence a stark contrast to the party I had just left behind. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady, and sat down in my favorite armchair. The chair that faced the fireplace, where countless photos of Brianna, from a gap-toothed toddler to a proud graduate, were displayed on the mantel. I looked at them not with sadness, but with a strange sense of detachment, as if I were looking at the life of another man. The symphony of destruction I had just conducted was about to reach its crescendo, and I wanted a front row seat. My phone, lying silent on the coffee table, suddenly buzzed to life. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years, a name that still carried the faint echo of old arguments and bitter resentment, Cynthia. I let it ring once, twice, a third time. I wanted her to feel that sliver of panic, the dawning horror that her perfectly orchestrated day was coming apart at the seams. On the fourth ring, I answered, putting the call on speaker. The sound that erupted from my phone was not a voice, but a shriek. It was a raw, unfiltered noise of pure fury. "Charles, what have you done?" I took a slow sip of my water before replying, my voice calm enough to be a whisper. "Cynthia, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Don't you play games with me, you miserable old man," she screamed, and in the background I could hear a cacophony of panicked voices and the distinct sound of a woman, probably Brianna, sobbing hysterically. The venue manager just came to me. He said, "Your final payment was declined. The band is packing up their instruments in the middle of the dance floor. You are ruining everything." "Am I?" I asked, examining a speck of dust on the table. "That's strange. I thought my presence was the source of all the drama." I removed myself from the equation. Logically, things should be running more smoothly now. "This isn't funny, Charles. Our guests are watching. The caterers are taking the food away. They're wheeling out the prime rib as we speak. You have to call them back. Fix this." "Fix it," I said, allowing a hint of cold amusement to enter my voice. "Cynthia, you and my daughter made it very clear that my role in this event was finished. You wanted a wedding without me. Well, now you have one. You just also have a wedding without my money. You can't have one without the other." "You are a spiteful, vindictive monster," she yelled. "No, Cynthia," I said, my voice dropping, losing all traces of warmth. "I am a man who has finally learned the value of his own signature. You wanted to make a statement by excluding me. Consider this my statement in return. Enjoy the rest of your perfect day." I ended the call, plunging the room back into a blessed silence. But the silence was short-lived. A moment later, my phone began to buzz again, this time with a series of text messages. The first was from my cousin Leon, one of the few relatives who had always seen through Cynthia's manipulations. His text read, "Charles, all hell is breaking loose here. I don't know what you did, but it's a masterpiece. The band just announced technical difficulties and walked off stage. Guests are just standing around looking confused." A minute later, another message from him. "Update. The catering manager is in a shouting match with Cynthia by the buffet table. He's saying no pay, no play. His staff is literally packing up the food trays and walking out the back door. I just saw a guy carrying the entire wedding cake." I felt a grim smile touch my lips. The machine was working exactly as designed. Another text came through, this one from an old friend, David, who I had invited as my personal guest. "Chuck, you are a legend. The florist is here with her team. They are stripping the centerpieces off the tables, taking back every single orchid. Cynthia tried to stop them, and one of the florists threatened to call the police for theft. Brianna is in a corner crying her eyes out. Kevin, the groom, looks like he's seen a ghost. What did you do, man?" I didn't reply to any of them. I simply read the dispatches from the front line of the war I had started. I imagined the scene. The opulent room, once filled with music and laughter, now descending into chaos and recrimination. The beautifully dressed guests whispering amongst themselves, the facade of perfection crumbling into a pile of public humiliation. They had wanted to erase me to make me invisible. Instead, in my absence, I had never been more present. I had become the ghost at their feast, a ghost who had just repossessed the entire banquet. The sun rose the next morning, indifferent to the wreckage of the previous night. I woke up feeling a hollow emptiness, the kind that follows a great storm. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a quiet ache. I went through the motions of my morning routine, a ritual that had anchored me for years. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee, the rich aroma filling the silence of my kitchen. For a few minutes I could almost pretend it was just another Sunday. But I knew it wasn't. The battle had been fought, but the war had just begun. I took my mug to the small table by the window, opened my laptop, and logged onto the internet. I knew what I would find. I just didn't know how vicious it would be. It didn't take long. My social media feed, usually a quiet place filled with pictures of my friends' grandchildren and fishing trips, was ablaze. I had been tagged in a post by Brianna. The photo was the first thing I saw, and it was a masterpiece of calculated tragedy. There was Brianna in the center of the frame, wearing the $10,000 wedding dress I had paid for. Her face was a mask of beautiful sorrow mascara streaked artfully down her cheeks. Her husband Kevin stood beside her, his arm protectively around her shoulders, his expression a perfect blend of stoicism and sorrow. They were framed by the chaotic backdrop of the half-dismantled reception hall, a scene of opulent ruin. It looked like a promotional poster for a drama film, but the text, The long, rambling caption beneath the photo was the true weapon. It was a declaration of war disguised as a victim's lament. It began, "With a heart shattered into a million pieces, I have to share the story of how the most beautiful day of my life was turned into an absolute nightmare by the one person who should have been my protector." I read on my coffee growing cold in my hands. She painted a portrait of a man I didn't recognize. She wrote of a father who was a covert narcissist, a man who couldn't stand to see her happy with someone else. She claimed I had been difficult and controlling throughout the entire wedding planning process, constantly making unreasonable demands and trying to make everything about myself. She twisted every act of generosity into an act of control, every piece of advice into a criticism. According to her narrative, the final straw was my uncontrollable rage when she and her loving mother Cynthia had gently asked me not to make a long, rambling speech at the reception. In her telling, my response was to fly into a narcissistic fury and sabotage the entire event to punish her for not making me the center of attention. He couldn't stand that for one day the focus wasn't on him, she wrote. So he decided that if he couldn't be the star, he would burn the whole stage down. My only comfort is my wonderful husband and my incredible mother who have supported me through his years of toxic behavior. The post had been up for less than 12 hours, and it had already been shared hundreds of times. But the comments section was where the true assassination of my character was taking place. It was a feeding frenzy. Cynthia's friends were the first to comment. "We always knew he was a difficult man, Cynthia. You are a saint for putting up with him for so long." Another wrote, "This is classic narcissistic behavior. Poor Brianna having to deal with that." Then came Brianna's friends, a chorus of digital sympathy and armchair psychology. "OMGB, I am so sorry. Cut him out of your life for good. You don't need that kind of toxicity. Sending you so much love. Your dad is a monster." This is why we go no contact with toxic parents. They were strangers, people who had never shared a meal with me, never seen me hold my daughter's hand as we crossed the street, never witnessed the pride in my eyes at her every achievement. They were reading a single biased account and were now experts on my entire life, on the very nature of my soul. They were judging, condemning, and sentencing me in the court of public opinion, and the verdict was unanimous. I was guilty. I closed the laptop. The quiet of my house rushed back in, but it was different now. It was heavier, tainted by the weight of 1,000 strangers' hatred. They had taken my money. They had taken my daughter. And now they were trying to take my name, my reputation, my very identity as a father. They thought their public shaming campaign would be the final blow, the move that would crush me into submission. They thought I would crumble under the weight of their lies. They had no idea what was coming next. They had fired their loudest cannons. Now it was my turn to aim. And I was armed with something far more devastating than emotional appeals. I was armed with receipts. For a long time, I just sat there, the hateful words of strangers echoing in the quiet of my home. They thought they had me. They thought that by painting me as a villain, they could control the narrative, that I would shrink away in shame and silence. But they had misjudged me. I am a builder. I have spent my entire life taking raw materials, chaos, and potential, and creating something solid, something with a foundation. And I knew that the most powerful foundation in any argument is the truth. I did not get angry. Anger was their weapon, a messy emotional tool. My weapon was clarity. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and began to build my response, not with insults or accusations, but with the cold, hard steel of facts. I started a new public post, and for the title, I chose words that were both simple and devastatingly accurate. The price of admission, a father's ledger. I began my post without emotion. Yesterday, my daughter Brianna shared her version of the events at her wedding, a story of a toxic father's rage. I understand that emotions run high in these situations and memories can be colored by pain. However, facts are not emotional. They are simply facts. In the interest of clarity, I would like to present the financial ledger of my relationship with my daughter and her husband over the past 3 years. Then I began to list them, line by line, a methodical accounting of my love and their exploitation. First, let's address the wedding itself, I wrote. The event I am accused of ruining. The total cost, which I had agreed to cover as my wedding gift, was $43,000. This included $20,000 for the Greystone Manor venue, $15,000 for the Artisan Events catering, and $8,000 for the Midnight Groovers band. I have attached a copy of the signed check for the initial venue deposit. I paused, opened my online banking portal, and took a clean screenshot of the transaction. I attached the file. Next, their housing. I continued typing with a steady rhythm. 18 months ago, Brianna and Kevin wanted to buy a home. They were unable to secure a loan on their own. To help them start their life together, I provided them with a $35,000 gift for their down payment. This was not a loan. It was a gift given freely. I have attached the bank transfer confirmation. Another screenshot. Another piece of the foundation clicked into place. Then there was the matter of transportation. Kevin needed a reliable vehicle for his new business venture. This turned out to be a brand new luxury SUV. Again, his credit was insufficient. I co-signed the $28,000 loan, making myself legally responsible for the payments should he fail to make them. I have attached a copy of the co-signer agreement. I scanned the document and uploaded it. The digital paper trail was becoming an ironclad case. Finally, I wanted my daughter to start her married life free from the burden of her past. Last year, I paid off the remaining balance of her student loans. The final payment was $15,000. This was to give her a clean slate, a head start that I never had. I have attached the final payment confirmation from the Department of Education. Another attachment. The list was complete. Each item was a pillar, and together they supported a truth that was unshakable. Below the itemized list, I wrote my conclusion. I poured all of my quiet dignity, all of my wounded pride into these final sentences. For 3 years, I have given a total of $127,000 to support my daughter and her husband's life and dreams. I did this not as a transaction, but out of love. In return for this love and support, I was given a photograph of myself and told I was not welcome at her wedding. My love for my daughter is unconditional. However, my financial support is not. It requires a baseline of simple human respect. I did not ruin a wedding yesterday. I simply made the decision to no longer finance my own public humiliation. Love should not have a price tag, but self-respect is invaluable. I read it over once, checking for typos. It was perfect. It was cold. It was irrefutable. I clicked the post button. The deed was done. I leaned back in my chair and took a long, slow breath. The ledger was now open for the world to see. The court of public opinion was back in session, and this time they had the evidence. After I clicked the post button, a profound silence seemed to fall over my world. I had launched my counteroffensive, a single data-driven missile into the heart of their emotional narrative. There was nothing more to do but wait. I closed the laptop, refusing to sit there and refresh the page like a teenager waiting for a message. I stood up, walked into my small workshop in the garage, and picked up a piece of wood. I tried to focus on the grain, on the familiar feel of the sandpaper in my hand, on the simple, honest work that had defined my life. But my mind was elsewhere. It was in the digital ether, watching as my carefully constructed truth began its slow, inexorable journey into the light. An hour passed, then 2. The suspense became a physical weight. Finally, I surrendered. I washed the sawdust from my hands, walked back into the kitchen, and reopened the laptop. My post was there, sitting silently. It had a few dozen likes and a handful of comments. My heart sank for a moment, thinking it had vanished without a trace. But then I began to read. The first comments were not from family or friends, but from complete strangers who had been drawn in by Brianna's initial post. The tone was cautious, inquisitive. One person wrote, "Okay, this is detailed." The other post was all emotion. This one is all numbers. $127,000 is a lot of money to be called controlling. Another comment appeared moments later. Wait a minute. He attached actual bank statements and a copy of a check. That's not something you can just make up. This story just got a lot more complicated. A woman tagged Brianna directly in the comments under my post. "At Brianna Baker, you need to respond to this. Are these numbers real? Did he really co-sign for your husband's car and pay off your student loans?" I watched as the questions began to pile up, not just on my post, but on hers as well. Her carefully curated wall of sympathy began to show cracks. Underneath the hundreds of comments offering her love and support, new ones were appearing. "Did you really ban the man who paid for your house deposit from your wedding?" someone asked. "There are 2 sides to every story, and his side has receipts." Another posted. The tide wasn't turning yet, but the waters were becoming turbulent. The narrative they had worked so hard to control was slipping from their grasp. By evening, the situation had escalated dramatically. My post had been shared over 1,000 times. The number of comments had exploded. It was no longer a trickle of doubt, it was a flood of public reconsideration. Then came the moment that truly shifted the ground beneath their feet. My cousin Leon, the one who had texted me from the wedding, entered the fray. He didn't just comment, he made his own public post sharing mine. He wrote, "I am Charles Baker's cousin, and I was a guest at that disaster of a wedding. I want to make something perfectly clear to anyone reading this. I have known Charles my entire life. There is not a more decent, hardworking, or generous man on this earth. He adored that girl, and he has spent his life making sure she had every opportunity he never did. The story he posted is 100% true, and what was done to him was not a misunderstanding. It was a cruel and calculated act of disrespect. Our family is heartbroken and disgusted by the lies being spread about him." Leon's post was a bombshell. He was a respected elder in our extended family, a man whose word carried weight. Suddenly, this wasn't just my word against theirs. There was a credible witness. Hot on the heels of his post, my sister-in-law, my late wife's sister Carol, added her voice. She commented directly on Leon's post, ensuring everyone would see it. "I can vouch for every word of this," she wrote. "I was there when Charles sold his beloved fishing boat, the one thing he ever did for himself, because Brianna needed help with her down payment. He told us he was just tired of it, but we all knew he was breaking his own heart for her. He did it without a second thought. To see him slandered and publicly humiliated like this is a disgrace to his late wife's memory. Brianna, your mother would be ashamed of you." That was the turning point. The validation from family members opened the floodgates. The narrative of the toxic father was completely dismantled, replaced by the story of a devoted parent who had been ruthlessly exploited. My public image transformed in a matter of hours. I was no longer the villain. I was the victim. The story had now grown beyond our personal circle. It had become a local phenomenon. An Atlanta-based lifestyle blogger wrote a piece titled, "The Greystone Wedding War: How Receipts and a Father's Ledger Flipped the Script on a Social Media Takedown." My post and Brianna's were featured side by side. Local news websites started picking up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about family money and the dangers of airing your dirty laundry in public. My quiet, private pain had become a public spectacle, a topic of debate for thousands of strangers. I saw my name and face on websites I had never heard of. I had won. I had cleared my name and exposed the truth. But as I sat there in the glow of my laptop screen watching the digital wave of support roll in, I didn't feel the triumph I had expected. It was a hollow victory. I hadn't wanted a public war. I had just wanted to walk my daughter down the aisle. I had wanted her respect. Instead, I had become a local celebrity for the worst reason imaginable, the star of a tragedy that was all too real. The wave of public support was a strange and disorienting thing. For 2 days, my life was no longer my own. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Messages from long-lost friends and distant relatives poured in, all expressing their shock and solidarity. I became a minor celebrity in my own quiet neighborhood. People would give me a solemn nod at the grocery store or a thumbs up at the gas station. They saw me as a symbol, a father who had stood up for himself. But to me, the victory felt like ashes in my mouth. I had proven I was not a monster, but in the process I had proven my own daughter was one, and there was no joy in that. I tried to reclaim a sense of normalcy, to retreat from the digital battlefield back into the tangible world I understood. I spent most of my time in my workshop, the small detached garage where I had spent countless hours over the years. The scent of sawdust and wood stain was my sanctuary. I ran my hand over an old rocking chair. I was restoring a project I had started and stopped a dozen times. The simple, honest labor of sanding away the old varnish and revealing the clean, strong wood beneath was a kind of therapy. It was a process of revealing the truth that was always there, hidden under layers of paint and neglect. It was on the 3rd day after my post, a Tuesday afternoon, that the phone rang. I was in the workshop, a fine layer of dust covering my clothes, and I almost didn't answer it. The caller ID showed an unknown number. I was tired of talking. I was tired of reporters from local news blogs asking for interviews, tired of the drama. I let it ring, the shrill sound cutting through the quiet hum of my tools. But on the 5th ring, something made me pick it up, a gut feeling. I wiped my dusty hand on my jeans and answered, "Hello." I said, my voice gruff. For a moment there was only the sound of ragged, uneven breathing. Then a woman's voice, choked with sobs, whispered my name. Charles. I didn't recognize the voice. Who is this? I asked, a note of impatience in my tone. It's Valerie, she stammered. Cynthia's sister. My blood ran cold. Valerie. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since the divorce. She had always been Cynthia's shadow, her loyal second in command. My guard went up immediately. What do you want, Valerie? Charles, I am so sorry, she wailed, her voice breaking completely. I can't eat, I can't sleep. What they did to you, what we did, it was wrong, it was evil. I have to make it right. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, a deep suspicion hardening my features. What are you talking about, Valerie? A little late for apologies, don't you think? I know, she cried. But you don't understand. You don't know the whole story. The public humiliation, the blacklist at the wedding, that was just the beginning. That wasn't even the main reason. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. The main reason for what? For everything! She shrieked, her voice rising in hysteria. Charles, it wasn't just about Cynthia being petty or Brianna being cruel. It was a plan, a cold, calculated plan, and it was all about money. I walked over to a nearby stool and sat down, my legs suddenly feeling weak. My workshop, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. Valerie, I said, my voice dangerously low, you need to calm down and tell me exactly what you are talking about, right now. She took a series of shuddering breaths, trying to compose herself. It's Kevin, she began, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. He has this idea for a tech startup, some app. He's been trying to get funding for months, but every bank, every investor has turned him down flat. They said his business plan was weak, that he had no experience. I'm aware of Kevin's ambitions, I said dryly. Well, he got desperate, she continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. He found one last option, a high-risk business loan, but the lender required a co-signer with significant assets and a perfect credit score. They needed someone to guarantee a $250,000 loan. The number hung in the air, obscene and unbelievable. $250,000. They needed you, Charles, Valerie sobbed. You were their last resort, but they knew you'd never agree to it. Not after everything. You're too smart, too careful with your money. So they came up with a plan to force your hand. I was silent, but my mind was racing, connecting dots I never knew existed. My hand moved almost of its own accord, tapping the screen of my smartphone and pressing the record button for the call. What plan, Valerie? I asked, my voice a hollow echo of itself. The cruelty plan, she whispered, as if the words themselves were poison. That's what Cynthia called it. She said that a direct request for money would fail. The only way to get you to sign was to break you down first, to manipulate you psychologically. I felt a wave of nausea. This was a new layer of betrayal, deeper and darker than I could have ever imagined. The wedding was step one. Valerie explained, her voice thick with guilt. The idea was to publicly humiliate you in the most painful way possible. To cut you off from your own daughter on her wedding day. They wanted you to feel abandoned, worthless, and utterly alone. The blacklist, the security guard, Brianna's cold words on the phone. It was all scripted, Charles. All of it. I thought back to the security guard's averted eyes, to Brianna's rehearsed, emotionless voice. It hadn't been an emotional reaction. It had been a performance. Step two was the social media attack. She went on, her confession now a torrent. They knew you valued your reputation. The plan was to destroy it. To paint you as a toxic monster so that you would be completely isolated. They wanted you to feel like the whole world was against you, that your only path back to redemption, your only way to see your daughter again, was to crawl back and beg for forgiveness. The pieces were all falling into place, forming a picture of monstrous, almost sociopathic calculation. And then, Valerie said, her voice dropping to a barely audible whisper, was step three. After a week or two of letting you suffer, after letting the public shame and the heartbreak do its work, they were going to come to you. Brianna was going to call you crying. She was going to say she wanted her daddy back, that she would forgive you for ruining her wedding if you would just prove that you loved her. And the proof was going to be co-signing Kevin's business loan. The sheer diabolical brilliance of it left me breathless. They weren't just trying to get my money. They were trying to get my money while making me feel like I was the one who owed them an apology. They would take everything I had, and I would have to thank them for the privilege. "Why are you telling me this now, Valerie?" I asked, my voice devoid of any emotion. Her answer came through a fresh wave of sobs. "Your post, Charles, your ledger. It ruined everything. You weren't supposed to fight back with facts. You were supposed to crumble, but you didn't. You exposed them. And the backlash, oh God, the backlash. People are calling our family. Friends are shunning Cynthia. Brianna hasn't left her house in 2 days. You turned their plan against them, and now I can't be associated with this. I can't let them drag me down with them. They're monsters, Charles. And I'm so sorry I ever listened to them." Her confession was born not of conscience, but of fear. She was a rat deserting a sinking ship. But it didn't matter. Her motives were irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the truth she had just delivered, a truth so ugly it made the initial betrayal at the wedding feel like a childish prank. "Thank you for the information, Valerie," I said quietly. Will you tell people I called you, that I helped?" She asked, a pathetic note of hope in her voice. "I will do what is necessary," I replied, and before she could say another word, I ended the call. I sat there in my workshop, the scent of wood and varnish suddenly feeling like the smell of a tomb. The silence was absolute. I lifted the phone and looked at it. A new audio file was saved, a recording, the ultimate receipt. The proof that this was never about a wedding or hurt feelings or drama. It was a cold-blooded, premeditated attempt at financial and emotional destruction. They hadn't just disrespected me. They had tried to dismantle me piece by piece for profit. And they had used my own daughter, the person I loved most in the world, as their primary weapon. I pressed play, and Valerie's frantic sobbing confession filled the quiet room. I listened to the entire thing again, every ugly detail, every sickening revelation. This changed everything. My quiet war for dignity was over. This was now a matter of survival. The recording of Valerie's confession sat on my phone, a small, unassuming audio file that held the power of a bomb. I could have released it. I could have uploaded it to the same social media platform where this whole sordid affair had played out, attached it to my original post, and watched as the last remnants of their reputations were vaporized. I could have become a folk hero, the father who brought down a family of schemers with irrefutable proof. The temptation was there, a low primal thrum in my blood. It would have been the final public execution, an eye for an eye, humiliation for humiliation. But as I sat there in the low glow of a single lamp in my living room, the house wrapped in the deep silence of a moonless night, I knew that wasn't my path. Public spectacle was their game, a currency of likes and shares and performative outrage. My currency was truth, and the truth didn't always need an audience. Sometimes its power was most profound when delivered directly to the guilty. I pressed play. Valerie's frantic, sobbing voice filled the stillness of the room, thin and tinny through the phone's small speaker. The digital hiss of the recording was like the sound of a snake in the grass. I listened to it all again, forcing myself to absorb every word, every nuance of her panicked confession. It was a plan, a cold, calculated plan. I closed my eyes, picturing them. Cynthia, my ex-wife, with her sharp, intelligent eyes that always held a flicker of contempt. Kevin, the ambitious but inept son-in-law with his desperate need for success he could never earn. And Brianna, my daughter, my little girl. I pictured them sitting around a table, perhaps in the very house I had helped them buy, scripting my emotional destruction as casually as they would plan a dinner party. The cruelty plan. That's what Cynthia called it. The cruelty plan. The phrase echoed in my mind. It was the clinical, sociopathic nature of it that was so breathtaking. It wasn't a crime of passion or a spontaneous act of selfishness. It was a strategy. They had studied me, my weaknesses, my love for my daughter, my pride, and they had weaponized it all against me. They weren't just a dysfunctional family. They were a conspiracy. They wanted you to feel abandoned, worthless, and utterly alone. And they had succeeded. For a time. I thought back to the crushing loneliness I felt sitting in my truck outside the manor, the shame of seeing my own face on a blacklist. That feeling wasn't an unfortunate byproduct of their actions. It was the intended result. It was the goal. They had tried to psychologically dismantle me to make me pliable, to make me a willing signatory to my own financial ruin. The proof was going to be co-signing Kevin's business loan. I listened to the end to Valerie's pathetic, self-serving apologies. When the recording finished, the silence that returned was heavier, more profound. The anger I felt was no longer hot. It was a block of ice in my chest. Releasing this recording publicly would be an act of revenge, and revenge, I realized, was beneath me. Revenge would still keep me tied to them, locked in a toxic dance of public warfare. I didn't want to engage with them anymore. I wanted to end them. I wanted to sever the connection so completely that it could never be reestablished. I opened my laptop. The screen cast a pale blue light on my face. I didn't navigate to any social media sites. I opened my email client. I composed a new message. My fingers moved deliberately over the keyboard. In the to field, I typed 3 email addresses one by one. Brianna, Cynthia, Kevin. I left the body of the email completely blank. There was nothing left to say. No accusations were needed, no final angry monologue. The recording would say everything. I clicked the paperclip icon and attached the audio file. The small progress bar filled quickly. The weapon was now loaded. Then I moved the cursor to the subject line. This was the only message they needed to read, the only words from me they would ever hear again. I typed 2 words, a simple final declaration. Game over. My finger hovered over the send button for a long moment. This was the point of no return. This was not a negotiation tactic. It was an amputation. I was cutting a part of my own life away, a part that had become diseased and was threatening to kill the rest of me. I thought of the little girl with pigtails who used to fall asleep on my chest. I thought of the proud graduate whose picture was now a symbol of betrayal. I mourned them both one last time. Then I clicked send. The email vanished from my screen, sent out into the digital void. I closed the laptop. The click of the lid was a sound of absolute finality, as decisive as a judge's gavel or a closing coffin. It was done. I hadn't set off a public bomb. I had slipped a single, silent drop of poison into their private world. Now all I had to do was wait for them to drink it. The email was a stone thrown into a deep, dark well. For 3 days there was no splash, no echo, no sign that it had even landed. There were no frantic phone calls, no angry text messages, no further posts on social media. There was only silence. A heavy, ringing silence that was more telling than any scream. I knew what that silence meant. It was the silence of shock, the silence of dawning horror. It was the sound of 3 people realizing that the game was not only over, but that they had been checkmated from the very beginning. I did not spend those days anxiously checking my phone. The weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The truth was out there, delivered not to the court of public opinion, but to the private court of the guilty. I felt a profound sense of peace, the kind that comes after a necessary amputation. The diseased limb was gone, and while the wound was still raw, I knew I could finally begin to heal. I worked in my garage, I took long walks, I sat on my porch and watched the world go by a free man for the first time in years. On the 4th day, as I was washing my lunch dishes, I saw it. A sleek silver SUV, the one my signature was on, pulled up to my curb. It parked clumsily, one wheel grinding against the concrete. The doors opened and they emerged one by one like ghosts materializing in the bright afternoon sun. Brianna, Cynthia, and Kevin. They looked like they had aged a decade in the last week. Their expensive clothes hung on them like costumes. Brianna's eyes were red and swollen, puffy from days of crying. Cynthia's usual mask of arrogant composure had cracked, revealing the desperate, haggard woman beneath. Kevin looked gaunt, his movements jerky and uncertain, his swagger completely gone. They stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, a pathetic trinity of failure, seemingly trying to gather the courage to approach my home. Finally prodded by a sharp word from Cynthia, they walked up the short path to my front door. I dried my hands on a dish towel, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. There was no fear, no anger, only a quiet finality. I was ready. The doorbell chimed, a polite, almost timid sound that was completely at odds with the turmoil that had brought them here. I walked to the door and opened it. I did not open the storm door. I left that clear barrier of glass and screen between us, a physical representation of the new boundary I had drawn around my life. They stared at me through the screen, their faces a mixture of desperation and shame. It was Brianna who spoke first, her voice a broken whisper. "Dad," she began, fresh tears welling in her eyes and spilling down her cheeks. "Dad, I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I never should have listened to Mom. She got in my head, she—" "Don't you dare put this on me, Brianna." Cynthia snapped, her voice raspy. Then she turned her gaze on me, attempting a weak, placating smile that didn't reach her terrified eyes. "Charles, please. Let's not do this. Let's not let this destroy us. We can forget everything that happened. We're family after all." Family. The word was a profanity coming from her lips. Before I could respond, Kevin stepped forward, his hands clasped in front of him like a nervous parishioner. "Sir," he said, his voice straining to sound reasonable, "we know we messed up badly, but we can fix this. We can put out a statement, tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. We can make it right. Just tell us what you want. Tell us what we need to do." I looked at each of them one by one. I looked at my daughter, a stranger wearing her face. I looked at my ex-wife, a venomous creature I had once loved. I looked at the feckless young man who had been the architect of this whole disaster. They still didn't get it. Even now, after everything, they still thought this was a negotiation. They thought there was a price, a penance they could pay to rewind the clock. I let the silence hang in the air, letting them squirm in the space between us. Then I spoke. My voice was not loud, but it was clear and hard, and it cut through their pathetic pleas like a shard of glass. "The man you are looking for, I began. My eyes locked on Kevin's, "the man who could fix this for you. The man who would make it all go away with a phone call and a checkbook. That man is dead." Their faces registered confusion. "He died last Saturday morning." I continued, my gaze shifting to Cynthia. "He died in the front seat of his truck when he saw his own face on a security blacklist. He died when he heard his daughter's voice on the phone telling him he was drama." Finally, I looked at Brianna, my daughter. My heart gave a single painful throb, the last echo of the father I used to be. The man who would have forgiven you for anything, who would have believed any lie you told him because he loved you that much. He's gone. The person standing here now is someone different, someone who has learned a very expensive lesson. "Dad, please," she sobbed, pressing her hand against the screen door as if she could reach through it. "I know I messed up. It was a mistake. I was wrong." "No," I said, and the word was as final as a closing grave. "You need to understand this, Brianna. You did not make a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash or turning left when you should have turned right. What you did was not a mistake. You made a choice. You made a series of choices. You chose to humiliate me. You chose to lie about me. You chose to participate in a plan to psychologically break me for financial gain. Those are not mistakes. Those are choices. And now, for the first time in your life, you are going to have to live with the consequences of your own choices." I saw the flicker of understanding in her eyes, the horrifying realization that the bank of Dad was permanently closed, not just financially, but emotionally. The safety net she had taken for granted her entire life had been taken away. I put my hand on the doorknob. "You wanted me gone from your life, remember," I said to all of them. "Consider your wish granted." I stepped back and began to close the door. "But we're family," Brianna screamed, her voice a raw, desperate shriek that echoed in the quiet suburban street. I paused for a fraction of a second, the door halfway closed. I didn't look at them. I just spoke to the wood of the door. "No," I said quietly. "Family doesn't do this. This is just business, and I'm closing my account." The door clicked shut. I turned the deadbolt. The solid chunk of the lock sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my own freedom. Behind me, on the other side of the door, I could hear Brianna begin to wail, a sound of pure, unfiltered loss. But for the first time, it didn't touch me. It was just noise. I walked away from the door back into the quiet of my own house, leaving them outside in the ruins of the world they had built. I stood with my back against the closed door, listening as the sounds of their desperation faded. Brianna's wails eventually dissolved into hiccuping sobs, and then into the angry, frustrated tones of Cynthia ordering her into the car. I heard the slam of car doors, the squeal of tires as Kevin pulled away from the curb too quickly, and then nothing. The silence they left behind was the most profound and beautiful sound I had ever heard. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence full of peace, full of possibility. It was the sound of my life finally returned to me. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. There was no joy in this victory, no satisfaction in their defeat. The only thing I felt was an immense, overwhelming sense of relief. It was like setting down a monumentally heavy weight that I hadn't even realized I had been carrying for years. The constant low-level anxiety about their finances, the emotional burden of their endless dramas, the weight of their expectations and disappointments, it was all gone. My shoulders felt lighter. The air in my own home seemed easier to breathe. I walked to the large picture window in my living room, the one that looked out onto the front yard. I saw the tire marks Kevin had left on the asphalt, a final scar from their presence. But beyond that, I saw my oak tree, its leaves just beginning to turn the brilliant gold of autumn. I saw the small bird bath I had installed last spring, where a pair of blue jays were now splashing noisily. I had looked out this window 1,000 times, but I had never really seen it. My vision had always been clouded by them, by what they needed, by what they had done. Now I was just seeing my home, my life. My gaze drifted to the fireplace mantel. It was a gallery of a life that no longer existed. Photos of Brianna at every stage. Her first day of school, her gap-toothed grin missing 2 front teeth. Her high school prom looking radiant and nervous in a dress I had worked overtime to afford. And the centerpiece, the large framed photo from her college graduation, the same one they had used for my blacklist. For a moment, a wave of profound grief washed over me. A mourning for the girl in those pictures, the daughter I had loved with every fiber of my being. But the man who had loved that girl was gone. He had been replaced by someone who knew the difference between love and liability. I walked to the mantel. I didn't smash the frames or tear the photos. That would have been an act of passion, and my passion for them was gone, burned out completely. Instead, with a strange surgical tenderness, I began to take them down one by one. I handled them like a historian archiving the artifacts of a civilization that had long since collapsed. I would not erase the memories of the good times, but I would no longer live among their ghosts. I carried the small stack of frames into my study and placed them in a box in the back of a closet. Out of sight. The mantel was now bare clean, a blank slate, waiting for new memories. My memories. Finally, I picked up my phone. I opened my contacts list. My thumb scrolled down to her name, Brianna. The entry had a picture attached, a selfie she had sent me last Christmas, smiling brightly. It was a lie. I pressed and held her name. A small menu appeared. Delete contact. My thumb moved without hesitation. A confirmation popped up. Are you sure you want to delete this contact? I pressed delete. Her name vanished. Next, Cynthia. Delete. Confirm. Gone. Then Kevin. Delete. Confirm. Gone. It was done. The last digital threads connecting me to their toxic world were severed. I felt a sense of finality, of clean, quiet liberation. I sat down in my armchair, the one they had never sat in, and I opened my laptop. I didn't open my email or social media. I opened a web browser and typed in a search, Best Deep Sea Fishing Charters, Key West, Florida. CBUPAD. For years I had dreamed of taking a real fishing trip, a week or two by myself in the sun and the salt air, chasing marlin and sailfish. I had always put it off. There was always something Brianna needed, a tuition payment, a car repair, a down payment. There was always a reason my dreams had to wait. There were no more reasons. I saw pictures of sparkling blue water, of powerful boats cutting through the waves. I began to read reviews, compare prices, look at calendars. A smile, a real genuine smile, spread across my face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The man in the blacklist photo was dead. Charles Baker, the fisherman, was just being born. Self-worth is not a negotiation. It is a boundary. You teach people how to treat you by what you are willing to accept. Sometimes the most powerful statement is not a word spoken, but a door quietly closed on what you no longer accept.